Hi, my name is Jeff Agano, and welcome to the Harpin On Rugby podcast. Joining me this week is someone back for cap number 18. Welcome back to Mr. Hugo Gordon.
Thanks, Jeff. Good to be back.
Always good to have you back. And let's get straight on and get to our feature match of the week. And here is a generic 80-word summary of how things went. Leinster beat Sale 43-13 to reach a sixth straight Champions Cup semi-final after transforming a tight 7-3 first half into a dominant second half display. Dan Sheehan scored early before Hugo Keenan, Ryan Baird, Rico Iwani, Tommy O'Brien and Jamie Osborne added tries as Leinster's exploited Sale's yellow cards and defensive fatigue. George Ford kept Sale in touch with kicks and Alex Wills scored late, but Leinster's tempo, kicking pressure and accuracy proved decisive. Now, obviously, we'll be going into a little bit more detail than that, but to start with Hugo, Leinster seemed to find themselves in another situation where they were easily the better team, yet at halftime, they were only ahead by less than a score and needing to rally after the break. It's far from anything that could be called a blip. Not only did we see it last week against Edinburgh, but also previous home matches against the Scarlets, Connacht, and even as far back as our first Champions Cup match against Harlequins. It's an odd problem to have, especially when we won all those matches in the end, but it's probably not a habit we want to continue in playing the semifinals and finals.
Yeah, no, it has been a bit of a weird one, and I kind of been talking in the WhatsApp group about making heavy weather this one, and heavy weather is probably a good description given the rain that was starting to come down as the game started, and I do think that probably played a bit of a role in this. But as you say, all's well and ends well, but this is becoming a bit of a running theme of the season. And if you look back at the last 3 weeks, and going back to that Scarlets game and then Edinburgh and then Sale the weekend, we've scored 128 points in that time, which is a pretty decent return. We're averaging over 40 points a game, but 64% of them have come in the second half. And our return in the first half really has been much less impressive. And there's often kind of reasons you can attribute it to, and for kind of individual games. And for this one, I think a lot of it was the rain. Having been quite a nice day in Dublin beforehand, and then a bit later on there was a bit of a squall around the start of the game, and even though the rain kind of died down a little bit fairly quickly, the ball was very wet, the ground was very wet, and it really showed, in part because we absolutely did not go out to play pragmatic rugby. We were throwing the ball around, we were playing with abandon. It was really fun to watch, but it was 100 miles an hour. And that's difficult to do when the ball is wet and it's hard to catch a pass or even to keep a hold of the ball when you've been tackled. And so many of our attacks in this first half ended with the ball squirting loose, after a slight mispass or after a tackle. And it was immensely frustrating to watch. And unfortunately, it also combined then quite badly with our scrum issues. Two kind of issues really playing into each other in a way that really did cause us problems. And first scrum kind of set the tone a little bit. We had the put in, we got shoved off the ball pretty effortlessly on our own put in, gave them a penalty. And there was a while then, particularly in that first half, where it felt like they were getting a penalty or a free kick off of every other scrum. Alex Usanov had a tough time in that first scrum against Asher Pokaforger, but Tyke Furlong also broadly came out on the wrong side of his battle against Cy McIntyre. And scrum problems have been a bit of a constant this season, and not been helped by injuries, and we'll talk a bit more about that in a bit. But it is a real area of weakness. And the two together meant that every time we attacked, we would drop the ball or knock on in contact. It would end up with a scrum that would then turn into a Sale penalty. So every time we knocked the ball on, not only were we kind of handing the ball back to Sale, we were often handing the ball back to Sale, who would then use it to march 20 or 30 meters further down. And so every knock on in their 22 was kind of ending up with their ball for them back in our half. And so it was just, it felt like kind of for every step forward we were taking, it was a bit two steps back. And though we did score a try through Dan Sheehan relatively early on, as time wore on, really felt like we were failing to turn dominance into points. We had a lot of possession and a lot of territory in that first half and very little to show for it. And I think you could see players start to get more frustrated, players trying to force the game a little bit, and it just kind of meant that we were kind of making the problem worse, it felt like. And some players, played very well throughout, and we'll talk a bit more about that in a second, but there were some players who I think we didn't see the best of during this period. Jameson Gibson-Park did not have his best half of rugby. I think he was just trying to take too much on, trying to make things happen a bit too much. But some of his passing off the back of the ruck really was not that effective. A couple of poor passes, which, combined with a wet ball, meant it was hard for players to take and led to more drop balls. And Rico Ioane really struggled with the high ball early on, dropped a few kind of meant that we were kind of put under pressure. And I was really surprised that Sale didn't actually target him more. It felt like they kind of didn't notice it was him who kept dropping the ball under pressure. And
I
it felt,
certainly haven't been listening to this podcast, that's for sure.
exactly. And it felt like actually it was a bit of a weakness that they didn't exploit and maybe let us kind of get away with a bit in that first half. And the kind of good news is that, we didn't. The difference between this and the Edinburgh game was we weren't handing Sale easy points. It was broadly a much better defensive performance, and we certainly didn't throw 3 interceptions. And so it was only 3 points that Sale had. They got a penalty through George Ford, a well taken penalty towards the end of the half, and that was all they had to show for it. So it wasn't like we'd given up. Was it 26 odd points like we had against Edinburgh? But the end outcome was the same. As you say, we went in less than a score ahead. After all this time, for all this dominance, we went in only 7-3 up. And, the nerves do start to creep in a little bit. The worry is if it carries on like that, then, you don't win a game through having more of the ball or having more time in your opponent's 22 or having more territory. You win it through points, and we weren't getting them. And all it takes is a couple of things going wrong then in the second half had we not kicked on. For things to go very wrong. And luckily, the second half was thankfully a very different story. I think Cullen probably gave them a bit of a rocket at half time. We came out looking fired up. We came out looking pissed off, frankly. Scored early, but our attack settled and clicked. We started looking a bit more slick like we had against Edinburgh. Those passes come off those lovely running moves. The interplay for that early try, actually, that Keenan scored, the build up to that was just lovely. It did help that the rain had eased off at that stage. Much drier ball, much drier turf. We were able to maintain our possession attack much better. It also meant that scrums were far less of a factor. And so that was just one weakness that we kind of didn't really have to worry about in that second half. I'm not entirely convinced there were any scrums in that second half. There certainly weren't many, and none in that last half hour, because I was trying to figure out where Dan Sheehan was.
We didn't get to see Dan Sheehan. Exactly.
And I was a bit frustrated by that. I'm not actually sure Tom Clarkson had to scrummage at any point during the game. It also helped that Sale got a player yellow card at either side of half time. Though they actually weathered that period relatively well. I think they only conceded 7 points across that entire sin bin period and then scored 3 in return. I think kind of damage was done a little bit. They looked a bit more tired. And we scored 3 tries in 10 minutes between about minutes 50 and 60. And that was game over as a contest, really. And so, in the end, job done. Comfortable win in the end. Ultimately, much better team showed, on the final scoreboard. But we can't keep doing this. We can't keep taking this long to get into games. Our last 3 games have been, and this is no disrespect meant to any of these teams, but our last 3 games have been against Scarlet, Edinburgh, and now Sale. These are not great sides. If we take this long to get into a game against Toulon or Bath, let alone Bordeaux, they are not going to give us that long to kind of get into our stride and give us that much space to find top gear. And as you say, it's not something you can write off as a blip. Bad weather, I think, contributed to it a lot yesterday, but this is something that's been happening a lot. Does feel like we're struggling a little bit still to find that kind of attacking defensive balance, and whatever one we're getting right on the day, the other one isn't quite working. And so it's something that needs to improve. It does feel like things are improving. And hopefully that upward trajectory can be continued. But some familiar failings in this one, for all that it was ultimately a kind of a positive day in the end.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one because, like we're pretty much saying what we said last week, in that you look at the exact same stage of this competition last year, we were winning by 60 points, 50 points, and we were saying, didn't learn anything from that. So it's like, what do you want? I mean, this year we're they're closer games. We are conceding a bit more. We're digging ourselves into a hole, but always feeling we can get ourselves out of it. And we're doing that, but it's still, like you say, it's still not ideal. You feel that, there's a feeling that, like you say, that like Sale's tactics were questionable. Like George Ford loves putting that bomb into the 22, but Hugo Keenan loves catching them. And they should know this. And but they kept kicking to him. And now on the plus side, I think that one of the things that's kept us in these games has been our defense. Now we've heard people complain about our defense because when you look at a highlight reel and you see, this guy missed a tackle here and this guy was narrow there, the actual try itself. But when you look at the amount of phases it takes for these teams to create a team, we've seen teams that get into our 22. It's taken up to 15 minutes to actually get the try, and even then it's often in the corner. This is Sale. It took them. I mean, the game was over by the time they crossed the line, and they never really looked like scoring because we'll talk about their lineouts later on. That certainly didn't help them, but but like you say, it wasn't a quality team we were playing. They're like what, seventh in the Premiership. They're not, they're not one of the top teams. We should be beating them. So in a way, we're sort of complaining that it wasn't 50-0, but it is a tough one. You just have to assume that since the problems are on our side of the ball, they can be fixed. You can see an improvement from week to week. I do like when the attack that we're going for now clicks. It looks really, really good, and it looks really, really difficult to defend. The passing is almost, when, like we say, when Gibson Park is on his game, particularly, the ball comes so quickly through the hands. The defense doesn't have a chance to react before it gets to the winger on the far side of the pitch, who's often in a lot of space, and we're making ground that way, even without the forwards. It looks almost undefendable when it's absolutely perfect.
It looks more like 2023 when, it's all these great attacking lines and all this lovely play. And I think there has been maybe a bit more of a move towards that style recently. Maybe we feel that we need to go a little bit more all out with it if we're going to beat the best teams. But it has been, I agree, kind of that's been looking much better the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. It was just when we were getting to the 22 and getting into the business end of the pitch, there was just a knock on here and just a pass going astray or whatever. It was just, it was extremely frustrating in the first half, especially again after such a good start. Yeah. But listen, like I say, we will talk about the positives in the second half. But I think it's such a trend that we found for these first half, situations we find ourselves in. I mean, I know. When we get to the end of the game, get to full time and we've won, I know that the response that I'm going to get, like on our Harpin Facebook page, is going to be negative because of that situation we were in halfway through the first half. It's just something, like I say, we definitely can't afford to do against the likes of Bordeaux later in the season. Well, elsewhere in the EPCR competitions, Ulster powered past La Rochelle 41-24 in Belfast, producing their best European display of the season to reach the Challenge Cup semi-finals where they will face Exeter. Connacht, however, fell away to Montpellier despite a spirited first half. Back in the Champions Cup, Bath edged Northampton in the thriller at the Rec, while Toulon stunned Glasgow at Scottstown with a late surge. Bordeaux completed the quarterfinal lineup by beating Toulouse 30-15 in an all-French clash. So now the semi-finals are Bordeaux v Bath and Leinster v Toulon, which I understand will be in the Aviva Stadium on Saturday, May the 2nd. And in the Women's Six Nations, England beat Ireland 33-12 at Twickenham in front of a record 77,000 crowd. The Red Roses powered to a 21-0 halftime lead through maul-driven tries and superior set-piece control. Ireland struggled with handling errors and line-out losses, but showed late improvements, scoring through Anna McGann and Erin King, with plenty of positives to take from the performance ahead of facing Italy in Galway next weekend for round 2. But now we must return to the Aviva Stadium, and in the Harpin WhatsApp group, we were given strict instructions by Coach Tom Coleman to be sure to mention the 77-minute cameo, in air quotes, off the bench by Jerry Cahir. And it's true, although we definitely have a crisis at Loosehead, which wasn't made any easier by Alex Usanov's early withdrawal on Saturday, Jerry has definitely done an amazing job stepping in when required this season.
Yeah, I love Jerry Cahir. I think this man was playing in the AIL last season for Lansdowne. And when he was signed as cover, it was a big vote of confidence. Clearly, Leinster saw something there. But even he can hardly have expected to have made the impact that he has, to have played as much as he has, let alone to have delivered as effectively as he has. The constant injury problems, you mentioned Usanov going off, and we're already been missing Porter, McCarthy and Boyle going into this one. And the constant injury problems we've had all season means we keep throwing this guy in the deep end all season long. And he just keeps on swimming. He keeps on taking whatever we throw at him and, coming out with credit. 11 games now this season. There was a big chunk of the Leinster squad last season that did not play 11 games all season. 11 games now, and that includes some big European fixtures. He had to play a full half, remember, against La Rochelle, and was really impressive in that game. Had a couple of really big defensive moments in that game. I said very nice things about him on the podcast after that one, I believe. And now he's got nearly a full game against Sale, and he did not let himself or his team down. He didn't have it all his own way. A couple of scrums definitely didn't go his own way, but he was hardly the only one in the front row who was having trouble. We mentioned Furlong's issues with McIntyre earlier. And he probably did benefit a little bit from the lack of scrums in the second half as well, because it was kind of, one area that maybe Sale couldn't target. But he kind of held his own in the scrum and he showed up effectively in the loose. And it's a really impressive showing for this guy. Another really impressive showing. In his own way, he's become one of our most important players this season because we keep having to go to him through injury problems. And if the injury situation stays like it is, he's going to be just as important going forward. But it's been I hope he's proud of how he played yesterday. He came on, I will say, I was a bit worried, Usmanov going off. Cahir's going to have to play 76 minutes. Go back and watch the replay. Cahir's got a big grin on his face when he's coming on. He is delighted with the opportunity, and I hope he's delighted himself because he really has been wonderful to watch. Sale's front row, no slouches, and we'll talk about that again in a bit, but really impressive stuff. With that said, I really do hope we start getting some props back for these upcoming games, because otherwise we are in trouble. Jerry Cahir is currently our only fit loosehead prop. Alex Usmanov going down as well. I felt really bad for him. Cahir, great opportunity for Cahir, but your first European start for Alex Usmanov, and this happens to you 3 or 4 minutes into the game. It must have been so frustrating. He looked pretty disconsolate going off the pitch. Hopefully he's not out too long. Hopefully we get Porter back soon. Because it's not even like we can turn to the academy. The only other 2 guys we have in the academy, Alex Mull and Andrew Sparrow, are both tight head props. They're not loose heads. I'm sure they could fill in a pinch if they had to. But really not an ideal situation. The reality is if Usmanov or Porter are out for any length of time, I think realistically we're going to have to sign a medical joker. As much as I love Cahir, there's only so much we can ask of him. And it is a major worry heading into the back end of the season. Look, the games are only going to get harder from here. And if we have only got one fit loose head prop for that, and maybe a medical joker and a couple of academy signings, that is going to be a couple of academy players playing out of position, then that's going to be tough. So hopefully we get Usmanov and Porter back. I'd be happy enough with a Porter, Usmanov and Cahir trio to see us through the rest of the season. But it is going to be tough, and it's going to be an area where other teams are going to target.
Absolutely. I mean, especially when you're, a team like Leinster that generally are attacking on both fronts. I mean, so every single game we play, especially since we lost matches earlier in the season, every single game has something riding on it. So you can't afford to have more than or less than 3 fit props. I mean, you can't be doing this switch thing, asking people on the tight head to play loose head. So hopefully we're going to have to get these guys fit. I mean, Usmanov, it was hard enough to have Usmanov play all the second half last week.
Yeah.
We didn't, we were all surprised when we saw Porter going off. So, they say to lose 1 is unfortunate. To lose 2 is careless. It's just, it's just a terrible situation. But no, the emphasis on how Cahir has done with his chance, like you say. I've heard that, all the AIL is a lower standard. The scrummaging in there at the top level there can be quite high, especially the front rows there. And we've seen players come up before. I think it was Donnellan came up as a hooker and played a few matches at some stage from Clontarf.
Or Ivan Sirocco last year as well.
Sirocco, exactly, yeah. So it's something that we've seen before, but again, it's something we don't want to rely on. So hopefully they'll have to make a call this week. It's too late in the season. They have to assess Porter, assess Usmanov, see how they are, and decide something. But fair play to Jerry. And the one thing we've been saying in the WhatsApp group more than anything else is when all those 4 guys are back fit, what happens to Jerry then? Do they just send him back? And it's a terrible thing. But hopefully something will come up. I mean, they might find a spot for him in another province or something. Okay, we're going to move on now and to another positive from Leinster's performance. And it's something I noticed against the Scarlets a few weeks ago. And Ryan Baird was coming back from injury, and he was up in the coach's box. And I noticed in that game, again, we struggled in the first half. But in the second half, it was like the Scarlets were throwing their lineouts to us. And we were pinching everything for fun. And now, of course, Ryan Baird himself is a known poacher, and he was involved in that. Max Deegan stole a couple when he was on as well. We were doing really well in lineouts overall.
Yeah, I think for the last couple of seasons, we've been complaining about the Leinster lineout a lot, the Leinster and Irish lineout a lot. But for all that things have broadly not been going maybe as well as we'd like for Leinster this season, there have been issues elsewhere. The lineout's been a real area of strength. We're on 92% lineout success in Europe so far, which is the same as Bordeaux. And only Pau and Cass in the entire tournament had higher, and they're both out. And we saw it again on Saturday, again over 90% success rate on the day. And we made a mess of their line out. It started in the first half, but even more so in the second half, where, to your point, kind of it felt like we had them figured out a little bit. Like I think we disrupted three of their first 4 or 5 lineouts in the second half. And when you're Sale and they've had limited time on the ball and they've got limited opportunities to attack, it must have been so frustrating. You finally get these chances, and then it goes the other way. And poor Ethan Kane, yeah, just tough all day for him at the lineout. But it's become a real weapon for Leinster on both sides of the ball. And given some of the set piece issues we've had elsewhere, that makes it even more important because it gives us that platform to attack. And it also denies opposing teams theirs because it's been effective on both sides. Sheehan's dart throwing has been particularly good, but as you say, kind of the likes of Baird and Deegan and Ryan have been making a mess of opposing lineouts as well. And I'm really hopeful that's something we can keep going because we're going to need that if we're looking for silverware, particularly if we're having injury issues in the front row, particularly if we're kind of still struggling to strike that kind of attacking defensive balance. This is one area where all season we've been able to go to, and hopefully we can kind of keep going to that well, because it's such an important advantage to have.
Absolutely, and I'm just going to agree with everything you say now because my voice is getting a bit getting a bit ropey now. I can't talk for too long, but we're going to move on and look at more individual performances. Dan Sheehan got the player of the match gong and thoroughly deserved.
Yeah, and it was a really excellent performance from him. Mentioned the line out throwing, but incredibly effective in attack. He scores the first try. He also assists two. And generally just makes a huge impact whenever he was on the ball. Watching it back, and I know he'd been having a good game, but the amount of times when he is that receiver and makes 5-10 yards, these really quick lines that the defense really struggled to deal with. He played 80 minutes. He shifted to, we think, the back row for the last quarter of the game, although it didn't really become an issue in the scrum. But and then that run from the Leinster 22 to set up our final try, he I kept kind of again summarising the line-out issues. He picked an overthrown line-out ends up with him. And he runs about 50 metres, not unopposed. He goes around a couple of defenders in the process. I'm not sure there's another hooker in the world who could do that. Certainly not right at the end of a match where you've already played 80 minutes. The guy is a freak. And I know he's had his issues a little bit this season. He's kind of maybe he struggled a bit in the Six Nations to find the form that we sometimes see of him, same in November. But when he has these days like this and you realize just what an extraordinary player he is, what a difference maker he is, one of the best hookers in the world, and was near his best on Saturday. But he wouldn't have been my personal player of the match because my personal player of the match was Hugo Keenan. Watching it back, just a near faultless performance. The only thing he arguably does wrong all game is he knocks the ball on in the air, which actually ends up getting called back for a penalty for Leinster for him being taken out in the air. And beyond that, I don't know if he makes a single mistake all game. He seems to have come back from this long injury layoff with a renewed energy. He's looking faster. He's looking more physical. He's looking more fired up than he has in a long time. We knew he'd been struggling with this hip injury and he was struggling a bit for form last season. Had his moments, but maybe wasn't the kind of Hugo Keenan of old. If anything, he looks better than ever now. And he was immense under the high ball. And that was so important in a game where Sale were really targeting that. There was 2 moments in particular that caught my eye, although he was catching balls all day. Firstly, in the first half, about 20 or 30 minutes in, George Ford sends this really good contestable kick into our 22, and the ball is swirling in the wind. There was a real wind in that first half. And Keenan adjusts, you can see him kind of adjusting, and he has to adjust really late because the ball shifts really late on. He adjusts perfectly to take it and call the mark. Under real pressure, there's the players coming in about a yard away from him. And then maybe even better was in the second half, he goes up for an attacking contestable, takes it again under pressure from, I think, George Ford again. And it sets up an attack that ends with Ioane going over on the left wing. But just a really extraordinary performance from Hugo Keenan. Just, he's everywhere on that pitch. In terms of that kind of bread and butter work that a fullback needs to do, again, I'm not sure that there's anyone better than Keenan. There's players who are faster, there's players who are bigger, there's players who are stronger, but he has this all-court game that really few other players have. And again, just a real difference maker. So important, if we are going to make this kind of end-of-season run. And then a few others just to mention. Tommy O'Brien, again, in the form of his life, looked really dangerous in attack, but also a real menace in defence. A few really great moments of the breakdown. Gary Ringrose really effective on rewatch. I actually hadn't really picked this up on first watch, but maybe his best attacking game for Leinster in a while. He was a real menace, and kind of a few times when he found space and really made things difficult for Sale's defence. Ryan Baird and Joe McCarthy probably our two best forwards other than Sheehan, and gave us real impact around the park, caused Sale all kinds of problems. We talked about Baird's line-out work. McCarthy's ball carrying was really impressive. And another very good performance from Harry Byrne. He had a couple of aimless kicks in the first half, but after that settled in. Again, a real threat with ball in hand. He has that carrying threat that we've maybe lacked a little bit, and some of his passing really, really good. Has a really nice pass in the build up to Keenan's try. And he's now 13 kicks from 14 off the tee over the last couple of weeks, and not gimmies. A few really difficult kicks in there, particularly last week, but one or two this week as well. He's just back in his best form, and I think it's been a while in particular since the Leinster 10 has been on kicking form like this, and it's so important. If you're for the as we head into further knockouts and head into the business end of the season, you need your kickers to be kicking, and if he can keep this going, that's such an important thing for us. And I did think Rico Ioane grew into it. I didn't think he had a great first half. He looked a little awkward under the high ball, had a few handling errors, and I know we've had our frustrations with Rico since he signed. But he did have a good game broadly last week. And in the second half, particularly once the rain stopped, he had a very, very effective second half, I thought. Had a few really good carries that caused Sale a lot of trouble. There's a few times when he picked the ball up in that wing, kind of found space, forced them into making a couple of tackles, gained yards, and then set up other attacks. And of course, he picked up another try off of that kind of view, off that Hugo Keenan high ball take. So, overall, combine that with the attack firing a little bit better. It is a really solid performance, and there's not too many who had bad games. There's not too many that when you went through the kind of the squad, you could say actually that on the day they didn't overall broadly deliver. We just need to make sure that as a squad we're finding that top gear earlier in games and not leaving it too late, because the talent is clearly there. There's very few teams in the world that wouldn't kill to have the talent at Leinster's disposal.
Yeah, a lot of good performances on Leinster's side. Yeah, I probably would have gone with Hugo as well. Player of the match. I mean, that doesn't take anything away from Dan. I got the impression that when it was announced in the 70 odd minute, he figured himself, oh my God, I better do something to really, really make sure I earn this. And the next thing he's breaking out of the 22, like you said, setting up a try. But listen, overall great performance. And I suppose that just leaves us giving a quick word about Sale's side of the ball.
Yeah, and that is the kind of the asterisk over this. We need to recognise before we get too far ahead of ourselves that Sale are a pretty limited team. We said it earlier, just as Edinburgh were. Sale are seventh in the Premiership. They have only won 3 games there this season. So 6 total wins all season if you include the European games. A powerhouse of a team they are not. They've had a few key injuries and suspensions, to be fair to them. They were missing Bevan Rodd, Luke Cowan-Dickey, and the Currys through injury. Nathan Jabulu got himself suspended for being an absolute idiot last week. And they know what their strengths are, and they've played to their strengths. They've got a good scrum, and we saw that particularly in that first half. And they're a little bit unlucky that the weather shifted and that kind of got taken away from them a bit in the second half. I thought George Ford did kick well. I do think he should have targeted Ioane far more than he did, but the kicks he sent up were good. He had a couple of good penalties. Sale's thing is that they want to drag teams into a dogfight, and they were able to do that in the first half, and they were broadly able to do it pretty well. But they are a limited side. They are not built to chase a lead. When the weather improved in the second half and it kind of took away one of their strengths, they didn't really have much left in the tank. They didn't really produce much through open play. They had 1 try when the game was long over as a contest. Once we started scoring, it was pretty much game over. They did have a few players who I thought were good, as well as Ford. I thought Tom O'Flaherty looked lively. I've always liked him, going back to his Exeter days. He looked dangerous with ball in hand, a couple of rough moments in defence, but, kind of put in difficult positions, so I wouldn't hold that against him too much. I thought Massey White at centre looked good, and I do think that Asher Opoku-Forger is a future superstar. It's easy to forget he's still only 21, and he is already one of the best props in England. I actually think he'd have more England caps if he hadn't had injuries at a couple of key moments. I think he's a superstar. I think he's a brilliant scrummager. I think he's brilliant to the loose, and he was again everywhere on Saturday. There's some good players there, but there are much tougher tests to come this season. And while ultimately it's been job done, we have been very lucky with the side of the draw that we've ended up on. It's getting to the tough stuff now. We've got Toulon up next. They're not the best side, but they're a much tougher team than we've probably faced in the knockout so far. Already turned over Glasgow at Scotstoun, and that's not an easy thing to do. And then in a final, we've got either Bath or Bordeaux. You'd say probably Bordeaux if we get that far, and Bordeaux will be another step up again. So we can't be too impressed with ourselves. There's a lot we need to work on. We played a much weaker team and we beat them comfortably as we should have, but much to build on from here.
Absolutely. And of course, we had some comments on our Facebook page as well, like Liz Power, who said, we haven't looked convincing all season with the exception of a couple of games. We railroaded teams in previous years and haven't won much, so maybe stuttering is the way to go. Kevin Scullion said, we will get beaten by a good team, simple as ... Do you agree, or would you have said the same thing a different way? Well, if you want to get involved in the conversation, just head to our Facebook page after the full-time whistle at Leinster and Ireland games and feel free to leave your thoughts. Okay, look, we're going to leave it there for now. Many thanks to Hugo for joining us. Looking forward to having you back on again soon.
Thanks very much for having me, Jeff.
Thank you. And as ever, be sure to stay tuned to Harpin On Rugby on all the socials during the week, starting with our bonus chat posting on YouTube Tuesday, where we'll be harping on the URC run-in. Then our 80 Plus column, where we try to look at the wider rugby world, and that post every Wednesday over on Substack. In the meantime, stay safe, everyone. Slán.